The plight of the low-skilled worker. So, what do you do? Is the question strangers can't help but conjure during icebreakers and fleeting first impressions. One misleadingly vague yet widely understood. For a living? Is always the subtext. New people are rarely eager to find out what you do for fun. For working professionals, the exchange is often a pleasant formality. Their employment required recognised training and is therefore granted social validity. Degrees and doctorates, diplomas and apprenticeships, myriad forms of paperwork proving that theirs is a career. When regarding the difference between professionals and non-professionals in the sporting domain, the answer is typically that the professionals are paid, while everyone else merely competes as a hobby. Following this line of thinking begs the question of whether a bin man is a hobbyist then, or whether the factory line is populated by schools of amateurs. Are there people who merely dabble in dishwashing, play at plastering, or tinker at telemarketing? Such is the plight of the low-skilled worker, an apparent Sunday leaguer of the job market. By definition, they're non-essential, expendable, ten a penny and often easily replaced. What do you do follows the premise that one must be defined by how they earn an income, when in reality a person is kept occupied by many things. Any part-time office worker raising an infant will tell you that their hours are mostly spent keeping the developing human alive. This, above all else, is what they do, but no one would ever call them a professional parent. Social convention dictates that they provide their 16-hour commitment when answering what it is that they do. Likewise, nannies and au pairs are not professionals, and neither are the coordinators of nurseries and playgroups, even though without them the world would grind to a halt. A young family headed by two working professionals often relies heavily on this system of support. After attaining their vocation, they must maintain it in perpetuity, dedicating those daylight hours week in, week out in order to climb the ladder or cling tightly to the rung they have reached. These careerists often pay strangers to raise their offspring in a full-time capacity, resuming charge on evenings and weekends, counting down the days until their children are old enough for school.
So, what do you do?
Mark is inevitably asked at the wedding, the one he's been dragged to with no prior knowledge of the people at his table. Such is the plight of the low-skilled worker that Mark blushes slightly, cringing at the question to which only one sorry answer can be given. "I work for Jaguar," he says simply, and the wedding guest nods, familiar with the car brand but evidently searching for embellishment. Mark's reluctance to deliver this prompts a moment of awkwardness, however. Why couldn't he have been asked what he does in his free time? If so, he'd have said that he paints watercolours, reads crime fiction, and is a dab hand in the kitchen. But now he is forced to expound on the monotony of life on the vehicle production line. Mark actually glimpses the life dying in the guest's eyes as he offers truthful elaboration. He's been to enough of these functions to recognise this change, to register the moment when all respect and interest in him as an individual is lost, providing his job role never fails to shape the dynamic. He's immediately identified as an unserious person, an inferior one whose opinions are no longer credible. "It's pretty dull," Mark adds automatically, "but the money is good. What do you do?" Greg, the guest, beams with pride on announcing that he's a solicitor. He acquired his training contract 3 years ago, specialises in litigation, and his ultimate goal is to one day make partner. While Greg's detailed description of his day-to-day strikes Mark as an exercise in abject tedium, much like his own brief explanation of assembling the same car parts every day, the gentleman is animated and enthused, thrilled to discuss his career and the meaning he derives from it. Such is the plight of the low-skilled worker that Mark's default reaction is embarrassment. Though on the face of it the two men have merely articulated how they each pay their bills, one works in an office and the other in a factory, and they both go home each night, eat, shower, and spend equal time asleep, it has now been highlighted that only one of them takes pride in their living. This is not to say that the solicitor enjoys his job. Quite the contrary. He admits the hours are long and stressful, and that some days he despises his colleagues, none of whom he interacts with outside of work. Conversely, Mark's hours are set. He gives precisely 40 a week to the factory, none of which he regards as stressful. And he shares a kinship with his production line colleagues, their bond strengthened by a mutual distaste of working for the Jag. Some are fierce friends, people who happily share a pint with, and occasionally a heartfelt chat. None of this could be expressed in the discussion of what these two men do, however. The answers have already been given. Mark works for Jaguar, and Greg is a solicitor. Such is the plight of the low-skilled worker, that Mark has identified himself as one of life's losers, now trapped in conversation with an unquestionable winner, who incidentally seems as boring as sin. Mark's girlfriend tries to transition into a conversation about films and TV shows, but the solicitor has no headspace for such frivolity. Books then, she presses, asking if he's read anything recently, quickly discovering that of course he hasn't the time. It soon becomes evident that what do you do is an all-encompassing question for a person like Greg. He practices law, lives and breathes it, and thus has zero capacity for anything else. But such is the plight of the low-skilled worker that Mark still envies this lifeless lawyer, a man who could answer the dreaded question without flinching. The job Greg does is universally respected, and it barely matters that he possesses all the charisma of an old dampened sponge. Thankfully, the post-mill speeches save Mark and his girlfriend from continuing to force further conversation with his spent source, from wringing out any droplets of interest from a drab utensil seemingly designed for only one thing. Mark wonders what would happen if Greg was stripped of his law license, and considers it possible that the man may simply cease to exist. After the bride and groom's first dance comes an obligatory period of social circulation, and Mark eventually finds himself chatting to a doctor. He's delighted when their conversation turns to sport and then literature, and it seems that he and the stranger have developed an unlikely rapport. They talk crime fiction and cooking, and the doctor is impressed by Mark's deep knowledge of unusual cuisine. The interaction is so unexpected and enjoyable that the latter loses track of time. Incredibly, an hour has passed since the pair made their introductions. Could it be? Has Mark actually made a friend at one of these events? They laugh and joke and oblige themselves at the open bar, and for a while neither of them demonstrates any desire to talk shop. But eventually the stylus scratches and slips on the record. The doctor catches Mark's eye. "Sorry, I didn't ask. What is it that you do?" Thank you very much for making it all the way to the end of the video. If you haven't already, please subscribe, and a like and a share would also be much appreciated.